Okay, what I'm going to show is a quick overview of the platform from the developer perspective. So what a developer can see and which are the advantages for them. So the first thing they're going to see is the account manager, where they can manage all their apps from here. They can also manage their profile, and in the future they're going to be able to manage their billing as well. So here you can create a new app, and one thing you can see is that they can do it themselves. They don't need us to do anything. Is the provision is automatic, and from here you can create an application from scratch, or you can select a new template. If so, the plan is to create some templates so people can start from something or use them as sample as well. So let's go to one of the apps we have already created. This is a test app that we have, and here you can see that you can set a few options like description, name, the icon, and then you have the different environments. We have the development environment and the production environment. Here in the development environment is where everything is going to happen. All the development is going to happen, and once you are sure that your changes are working as expected, you can sync your changes from the development environment to the production environment. This is a just one click thing, and it's fully automated. Another thing you can see here is that you are able to manage the number of instances. You can configure database, so all resources are automatically deployed, and we have created the platform in a way you can scale out your apps by adding more instances. The database we allow at the beginning, the database is shared, and it's going to be built by the amount of storage that you're using. But at some point, you can choose to move to a database with dedicated servers. Still, that's a manual process, and we are going to automate that in the future. But the idea is that you don't have to worry about anything as a developer. You just go there, create an application, and all the resources are going to be managed by the platform. So backups, databases, app instances, endpoints, etc. are going to be managed by the platform. Also here you can define which are the developers that are going to be able to work on the apps as well as on each environment, and then you have admins. So let's describe a little bit which are the components on each environment. So you have the builder, where you are going to edit the metadata of the application, and where developers are going to work to create the apps. Then you have the runtime, which is going to take the metadata and it's going to execute the application. And finally, we have the monitor, which is another component that where you can see what's going on your application. You can see the jobs that are running, you can see the logs, you can see state of endpoints, etc. So let's start from the component that probably is more interesting for developers, which is the builder. So one thing, so for you to know, to understand which were the goals when we created the builder. So the idea was to follow some guidelines from domain-driven development. So what we try to do is that when we create our model, most of the things are propagated across the application. For example, you have an entity and you have one field on that entity. There you describe how that field has to look like, which are the rules for the information that is going to be stored there, and those rules are applied across the whole application. So you don't need to go through every single point to make changes. Another example, usually in applications created using traditional technologies, for example, you create a new field, you need to go create the field on the database, then create that field on the data layer, then on the business logic, and go move that information through the API, and then change the UI as well. So there are a lot of places where you need to change things. So our idea was to make it more smoothly. So when something changes, you don't need to go over your whole application to make all the changes. That increases agility, which is something very important because business applications are going to evolve over time. So one of the key features is to be able to adjust your application quickly so you can meet the business needs. So let's go to the main concepts we have here. So we have probably the most important thing is entities, endpoints and listeners in the model. And then we have a section in security where we can handle users, groups with permissions, single sign-on, and then the UI where we have the different types of views, navigations, and other settings. Let's get started with entities, which are the central piece of the model. So I'm going to open one entity, and you will be able to see that we support very rich data structures. For example, we have nested fields that can be multi-valued. So one contact can have a lot of addresses. Then we have many types, and we try to make types as rich as possible. So types have a lot of options indicating which are the validation rules for them, which data are allowed, and how to display that information. So let's take a look at this company field, which is a relationship field, which, by the way, is a very special type because relationships are very important. So here you can, for every field, define names, multiplicity, and some general options like default value. If it is required or not, it might be required based on some expressions. For example, you can say it is only required if company, I don't know, something very simple, but if company is this one, it is required, otherwise it is not. Then you can indicate if it is unique, searchable, which is indexes transient, so we don't store that in database. Sensitive, you can indicate, okay, I want this field to be displayed only in some circumstances based on some conditions. That could be an expression with expression builder, or you can just write script if it is more complex. Also, you can have calculated fields, and you can write the calculation here. All scripts are JavaScripts. The idea was to let developers use what they already know, so we don't want them to learn a new language just for idea too, but reuse their skills that they already have. Then each type is going to have specific rules for that type. In the case of relationship fields, you can indicate the entity they are pointing to. You can set some filters. For example, in this case, only it is allowed to select companies that are active. And you can also set some cascade options on relationship, what happens when the other worker is deleted, for example. Then we have display options. So you can say, okay, this field has to be read-only always at the UI level. You can change the representation of the relationship, may put some filters, enable linking so you can jump from one record to another easily. So there are many display options. The idea is that each field is going to have their own display options to configure how the information has to be displayed. And finally, we have permissions. So you can say for each group what kind of access they have for that field. It could be read-write, read-only, write-only, or no permissions at all. So which is important to keep in mind is that when you make a change here, it's going to be applied across the whole application. So if you change the way this field has to be displayed, it's going to be propagated to all views. Same for type rules and journal rules. For display options, you are able to override those rules on specific UIs because we know that's needed sometimes. So that's the structure of the data, which you can see it's very powerful. And then you have actions where you can basically indicate the things that can be done over records or over a set of records. You can have actions for one record or you can select many records. So you can set some properties like preconditions to when this action can be executed, which is very useful when you have to define workflows because not all actions are available on every step. You can add parameters here to ask for to enter something when the action is going to be executed, which are basically fields. You can define permissions, who is able to execute the action, and then you have the behavior of the action, what is going to happen when the action is executed. And here is where you have one script. We have created a JavaScript API that makes it easier to create scripts to work with the data, save records, find records, and do all the common operations. The important thing to keep in mind is that you never have to create boilerplate code. You just focus on what you have to solve, no more than that. So scripts usually are short and very concise. And we believe that in many cases it is better, faster to just create a few lines of code than having to create everything in a declarative way. Over time, we are going to add more tools when it makes sense to create things in a declarative way. So maybe this action, we are going to have different options between one script or let's suppose an action to send an email or something like that that can be configured in a more declarative way. Then, so that's for entities, which are the main concept. Then let's switch to endpoints, which allow you to integrate with other cloud services. Here, you can see the configuration of endpoints. So, for example, for this endpoint, we have all the keys and things that you need to configure. Here, usually you won't see something like this. This is this up, but you probably see something like this. And then you're going to have one environment variable here. You can replace on between development and production. So once the endpoint is configured, then you can catch events and send messages to those endpoints. So our integrations are more event-driven, and you can see that here. For example, we have one listener that is listening for events coming from Slack endpoint, and you have the different events. For example, when an event arrives, you can do something with that, and basically it's just a script. Here, you always will have the data of the event, and you can do whatever you want. For example, you can just log the text of the message. And the idea is that we try to make some transformations to the data, so it is very easy to process on scripts, to store that information on entities, on idea 2. So we try to make it as easy as possible for the developer to work with data coming from from endpoints, and also when sending information to endpoints. So we are aware that in some cases it will be easier to have some UIs to configure integrations. We think that this approach is very flexible and allows you to use every feature that the other service offers. So in that case, we think it's better. But we acknowledge that in some cases it gets a little bit complicated when you just want to fetch a few fields from here and there and use them. So over time, we are going to have more features to make that easier to use. Now that we are on listeners, you can see that there are different types of listeners. So you can do something when, for example, a user is created or updated, or for example, for jobs, when an import is finished, you can do something else. Uh, Also, we have time events, which are basically a cron expression you can use and do something when that happens. So those are the most important concepts from the app model. Then let's go to security, where you can manage users. Users can belong to groups, and groups is where we define permissions. So each group can indicate which are the entities they can access. For each entity, it is possible to define permissions for access, creation, edition, and deletion. And you can even indicate when you can access these records. For example, you might say, okay, you have permissions when for this record only when the field type is type 1. So it's very, permissions are very fine grained, and there is a lot of flexibility to define them. Also, you can define permissions for every single field on the entity and for the actions. Then you have view permissions, where you basically can say if they have access to use that view. And finally, some additional security settings, for example, whitelist of IPs or password rules and password policies. And another cool feature is single sign-on. So far we have single sign-on for Slack and for SAML, and it is very easy to set it up. Just need to create a new single sign-on, a new identity provider for Slack, set a few settings, and we are ready to go. And finally, we have the UI, where you have a few settings here. So far it's theme, and then we have the different types of views. Collection views is basically a list of records where you can do different operations like create, edit, or delete records. So let's take a look at one of the views that we have here, like companies. You can configure how the listing is going to work, like sorting, page size, options, actions that can be executed from the grid view, filters to only show some records, not all of them, which columns are going to be displayed, how they are going to be displayed. You can indicate if you can see details of records, create new ones, edit ones, delete, and for each of these views you can configure how they have to look like. Also, you can add sub-collections, which is a kind of master detail relationship. So for example, a company have contacts, projects, all those, and you can see them below the company record. So then we have entity views, which are just the record view. And for things where you need more customization, we have custom views, which are basically JavaScript and HTML, where in JavaScript you have some helpers to be able to call the IDEA2 REST API easily and fetch the information you need to create your custom view. And finally, we have navigation, which is just the left menu. So those are the basic things about Builder, and I don't want to forget about to mention how you push changes, because when you make changes here, these changes are done on the metadata, but they are not applied to runtime. If you want to see those changes on the runtime, you have to push changes. When you push changes, all the changes that you have made are going to be applied to the application. And you can do some backups, so then you can keep a version of your application over time. You can go back, restore something, and so on. Another important thing to keep in mind is that when you push changes, if there are refactorings that need to be done on the data, because for example you changed the name of the field or you deleted one field, that's going to be done automatically. You don't have to worry about it. And finally, when everything is working on your development environment, you can sync changes to production. So that's going to export data from your development environment, stop the application on production, import metadata, and then start the application again. If there are small changes, this is going to happen very quickly. If you have done changes that have factoring and that affects a lot of data, maybe that might take a few minutes. So those are the most important concepts of the builder. So as I was saying, the other components is the runtime, which is what takes the metadata that you have created on builder, and that's going to sorry, still one. So that's going to execute the application. So here you can see the different collection views that we were configuring. As you can see, you have a lot of flexibility about how they look like. You can create new records, export, execute an action over different records, do some filtering, open the records. As we were seeing, these records have sub-collections, so this company have these contacts under it. You have projects, etc., etc. You can edit, cancel, save. So this is what users are going to see from your app, from the app you have created. They can also you can manage other users. As we are an admin user, we can switch to other users, which is very useful when you are testing permissions. So you can see how other people is going to see the application. You can manage your integrations for here for endpoints that are per user. So for Google Calendar, for example, you might want to, okay, it's not correctly configured. This one it is. So you can connect your user to Google. So the endpoint is going to perform all your operations as you. So I think this is just a quick overview of the builder. And the other component is the app monitor, where you can see what's going on the application. So here you can see, for example, the dashboard, where you're going to see the basic status of the application, users that are on the app at this time, jobs that are running, logs, and status of integrations. Also, you can change your environment variables. So for productions, you probably want to change them. You can see jobs. We have a strong jobs system that allows you to run things on the background, which is very useful when you have long running things, and it's crucial for some operations. Then we have logs, where you can see what's going on the application. You can see errors. Actually, you can get alerts when errors happens on your application, so you can take action. You can see, for example, events that have arrived from different endpoints, and you can see the information on those events. Then you can manage users from here, and also see the status of integrations and what has been the activity on those endpoints. So basically, you can see what's going on your application from the app monitor. So I think that's the overview of most of the components we have on the platform, and that will give you a good idea of what we have.